Ladies and gentlemen, the session will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Over the years, I've come to realize how impactful and influential AI is as a technology. And it's so important to understand the different ways in which that technology works, to make it less intimidating, to make it clear that it's a series of human decisions that we can control, rather than this futuristic sci-fi, uncontrollable thing that is out of reach in terms of us being able to change.
Where do you think you're going? Well, I'm not going that way.
So I think that there's a lot of benefit, there's a lot to gain from involving yourself in really understanding the details of how this technology works. Is something that will influence your life and the life of everyone that you love and the life of everyone around you. And that's why I would encourage young people especially to, even if they don't want to be an engineer and do it for the rest of their life, to really just properly engage in getting a sense or an understanding of the basics of what it means for the technology to work. If you're someone that cares passionately about people and you have an interest in computer science, the field definitely needs you. There's so much that we can learn from you, can learn from your empathy, can learn from your attention to the experiences of other people. We desperately need diverse perspectives in this field to shape a future vision for AI that is inclusive, that is impactful in the right ways, and is attentive to the concerns of those that are most vulnerable in our society.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, we can do better than that. Good morning. I'm Jackie Smalls. I'm the Chief Programs Officer at Code.org, and I'm so excited to be here. Really, it's kind of personal, because when I joined Code.org 18 months ago, in March of 2020, it was announced that we were in a pandemic, and the world shut down. Great time to start a new job, right? But there are many challenges, but I just knew that there was challenges that I was facing was not like the challenges our teachers were facing. So before we begin today, I really would like for everyone to join me. If you could, push away from your tables, stand up. I'm not going to make you do anything crazy, I promise. And let's really give the teachers and all the school systems a round of applause for all that they've done to make sure our students are well educated. And keep standing, because I also want to take this opportunity to thank everyone that made this happen for us this week. Hasn't it been great? All right, great stretch break. You may be seated. Thank you so much for that. I'm also excited today because 8 years ago, I shared the stage with my friend and colleague, Stephen Pruitt. I came onto the stage, and it was my responsibility at the National Teachers Association conference to introduce Stephen as the keynote speaker. And we were so excited. When I looked out into the audience, it was filled with teachers, but not just filled with teachers. They were lined up on the walls. They were in the aisles. The room had reached capacity. Because that day, Stephen announced the release of the Next Generation Science Standards. And so that was an amazing opportunity. And here we are today to listen to the lessons learned from that process and how it might be applied to the CS movement. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Stephen to introduce himself.
Good morning. Oh, very good. It's so good. So I have been able to speak in public now a couple times since, everything shut down. And normally I pretend I'm on mute for the first couple of sentences. But since I'm having to wear the mask, I couldn't do that because you wouldn't know what I was doing. So, I think it's a protocol now. So I'm Stephen Pruitt. I am president of the Southern Regional Education Board. I guess it's sometimes I don't know that I need to say Southern because as soon as you hear me talk, you're kind of clear that he's not from here. I'm president of the Southern Regional Education Board, former commissioner of education for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I was the lead for the development of the Next Generation Science Standards, and most importantly, I was a high school science teacher. That was always my most important job. But I've had a lot of luck and a lot of great opportunities in my life. One of them was to work with this wonderful person to my right, who she hates it when I bring this up, but I'm going to anyway. So Jackie was in the Army and chose to go work to teach elementary. And when I say she was in the Army, I mean, she, has a brilliant science and engineering mind, and where most of us that have that kind of training go into high school, she chose to go into elementary. And I don't know about you, but once they get under 14, they got to be somebody else's. Because I can't do that. So I always loved to brag on the fact that Jackie had a mission, and she worked on that, and a lot of kids got a lot of benefit.
Thank you so much for that. All right, well, let's get started. How about that? So
Let's go.
I have a bunch of questions, but we really want this to be interactive. You can eavesdrop in this conversation, or you can participate. So we would love for you to come up to the mic at any time, not just wait until the end, that awkward pause. Does anyone have any questions? Please come to the mic so we'll make sure that we recognize you during our conversation. So the first question I have, Stephen, in terms of, you just spoke of the Next Generation Science Standards, but a small project we worked on together.
It was small.
Small project. What can we learn in the CS movement from that journey? Like, what are the lessons? So the journey, I know you can go on and on for days about the journey, but what about the lessons? What would you have done differently?
Well, you know, I would say that the first thing that comes to mind is you need to recognize that any type of movement in education is going to take time. You know, no great education idea ever died in the vision phase. You know, it always, it's about implementation. And so, you know, when you go into this, you have to know that this is not going, no matter how dedicated, how committed you are to a particular issue, it takes time because you have to make a case. You know, I like to say that education is not rocket science because rocket science is actually easier. Now, given I'm a chemist, so maybe I'm not the best person to make that comment, but you know, the point is you're dealing with human beings. So it takes time to build that understanding. Another lesson I would say is ownership. One thing I think that we did a very good job of, in that room that you talked about, you know, we had people stand up if they were part of a writing team, if they were part of a review team, if they were, you know, and at the end, I mean, there were about 5,000 people in that room, and at the end, more than 95% of the people in the room were standing. Because I can tell you that states do not like to have things put on them. They want to feel that ownership. And so finding a way to help people become what I call shareholders instead of stakeholders. You know, stakeholders kind of comes from that time of Ringling Brothers when somebody held a large stake while somebody else swung a really big hammer near their head. A shareholder is somebody that now owns it and they invest in it. And then I guess, you know, the thing that you know, I'm not sure completely what I would do different, but I think there would be some things that we would push harder. And one of the biggest ones is clarity around what the initiative is and how it fits into an overall educational scheme. I think we did a pretty good job with that, but the connector we didn't necessarily make as well as I thought we could have was around workforce. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but you know, in the world of science and in the world of computer science, there are people who don't know what those things are. So you have to find a way to talk their language and help them see what you see, but how it's in the context. As a former commissioner of education, I can tell you every day there was somebody that had something that I needed to do. Every day. It was like, oh, you got to do this. Oh, you got to do that. And it becomes really kind of white noise, and you end up making decisions based on, you know, your advisors or whatever. The people that got to me the most were the ones that could show me how what they were pushing fit into the overall educational context. And I think computer science is a particular one there that would be a good focus.
No questions yet? Don't be shy. All right, I have another question for you. Many states have adopted CS standards, and we've been working towards ensuring CS is accessible to all students, which comes with many challenges, as we all know. What should we consider as we reach the milestone of 51% of high schools now offer CS? And we applauded that this week, but we still have a long way to go. So what should we consider in the next mile?
Well, so there's a couple of things, I think. Obviously, the push to continue to offer the opportunity to be a part of computer science. But I think you're going to have to make that case of why that's going to be important for that student's future, and not just that they take a computer science class. You know, we're going to be living in a world where if you don't understand the thinking involved around this, you're not going to be a viable member of the economy. So that would be one part. But the other part that I would push already, even in those 51%, is equity. And the equity here is this. There are lots of things listed on a course of study in schools across our country. That doesn't mean students actually get to take them. So one of the things that I've pushed, even in accountability, is that we lessen the amount that we rely on statewide assessment and look more at what we're providing opportunities to do. So example here would be if you offer computer science fourth period, of course everybody knows fourth period is the longest period because that's lunch period. But that's also the same time that you're offering remediation courses for students that need to be caught up because it's the longest period. And you're offering band that same period because it's the longest, because it takes them a while to get out to practice. And you're offering AP courses that period. You don't actually have opportunity to take the class, or what I would deem opportunity. So one of the things that I would push for in the next mile is how many students are actually getting to take those courses? Are we giving that access to each student and not just, and I'm very particular about saying all, because all is a way to mask things. But are our students of color, students of poverty, are females being able to be actually in those courses, or is our master schedule actually prohibiting it?
So you brought it up, so I'm going to continue with what you said about access and actual participation, because we know that there's a difference. So what do we need to do to close the gap that we know that exists in CS for Black students, young women, Hispanic students, Native students? What do we really need to focus on to really close that gap?
Well, I think that part of it is the folks that are making decisions about education at the school and district level, they have to broaden their perspective beyond math and literacy. And we tend to get very caught up in the accountability aspect of this. And it's one of the reasons why I've been a proponent of actually making those changes to accountability systems so that people, I'm not saying math and literacy aren't important, they obviously are, but if we really want to educate a whole child to let them have access to what eventually will be our workforce, part of that focus has to be the recognition that while I'm trying to catch kids up, those kids also deserve opportunities. But when it comes specific to our students of color, we have a little bit of a chicken and an egg issue here in that they aren't seeing people in the industry that look like them. So we got to have very specific strategies on how we're recruiting, starting in middle school, students of color, students of poverty, into career pathways that are central around computer science, cybersecurity, IT, so that eventually students, it becomes just more normal that I say, okay, because I think there's some truth in the fact that if I don't see anybody that looks like me doing it, then I'm not supposed to do it. So I think we've got to work on both levels. We've got to work on the recruitment at the workforce level, but we've got to increase the pipeline. It's not a leaky pipeline, there's no pipeline. Or it's a trickle, I guess. But we've got to really do a better job of identifying and recruiting students at that middle school level, just to make them aware of what's there. The opportunities that students are afforded in the workforce of actually, especially in a post-COVID world, of being able to work remotely, that's going to be something that this generation of kids are going to like. So we should promote that.
So I'm going to push on that a little bit, because I could say for myself, I didn't get support or see myself in a STEM field until it came to college. And I went to a historical Black college, South Carolina State University. I know there's somebody from South Carolina in here. Woo woo. However, you said middle school and high school. What about the K-5? Why don't we start at K-5? Because many of us, that's what we're doing, and actually we're focused on, because we can see if we get them early and can see themselves early, maybe they might stay and continue beyond high school because they think it's an opportunity.
So I absolutely think K-5 should be engaged in work around computer science. My comments were more around the fact that about middle school is when you start, or when you should start exposing students to potential careers. But why would I do something in middle school for a career of something that I've never had experience with before that? So having students engage in that in elementary school I think is a really important thing. I think that to do that, there's got to be an investment in our teachers, though, because, and frankly, an investment in the understanding of our administrators. Because again, if I'm more worried about math and literacy, I'm not having time for computer science, social studies, and all of those things are actually important for a student to be a whole student that becomes a member of a society by which they can pursue their version of the American dream. So having a K-5 experience in computer science that is able to be communicated to people who don't, and again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about communicating it to the general populace. I think an unfortunate aspect at times in elementary school is parents look at what kids are doing with computer science as fun and not necessarily learning. And I think we have to find a way to reposition that they are, they're having fun. But I mean, let's face it, in science, I mean, one of the reasons I decided to teach was because I could blow stuff up legally. I mean, you have fun, but we've got to figure out how to communicate that to the parents there. Then when they get to middle school, they're able to look back and go, okay, I've had a little experience with this coding thing, and a little bit, I understand about what this could be. And then we can start to let them explore what careers are out there in middle school.
By the way, you would have been a great elementary school teacher because the kids would have focused on your socks.
Yeah, my wife won't let me buy normal socks. And it's partly because I'm colorblind, so I really don't know what I have on right now.
We could talk about why in GSS are the colors.
Yeah.
Later. So we have Victoria, I think. I don't have my glasses on, but I think Victoria has a question for us.
Hi.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. You've mentioned really important shareholders in the education of our students. You've mentioned teachers, administrators, parents. How can we get school counselors on board, especially in middle and high school, when a lot of times students have to go through them to figure out what classes should I take, what can I take?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, that's a tough one. So I'll start with a more basic comment and then build it a little bit, I hope. One thing is we probably should start letting counselors be counselors and not test administrators. In fact, I'll never forget, I was walking into the Kentucky Department of Education and I was seeing all these tweets from counselors saying that they're at the state assessment conference. I'm like, why in the world are all the dang counselors at this test conference? So I walked in the room and I knew a lot of them, and I said, why are y'all all here? And they're like, well, we're the building assessment coordinator. I'm like, okay, I want all of you right now, get out your phones, hit 2 and put your principal's name in there and say, Commissioner Pruitt said, I should not be here. You can imagine the emails I got later, but I think that's, one thing is we need to give counselors the room to be counselors and not duties as assigned. That's one. Another one is, and I've always been a little bit of a proponent of having additional support in schools, either through community partnerships or through an actual FTE employee whose real focus it is to connect students to careers, especially in the immediate area, but that are in high need. So I have a degree in chemistry. I know in general, I'm a little more than in general. I know what chemists do, but your average high school counselor probably couldn't really communicate that very well because they never did it. And even as a chemistry major and with a chemistry degree, I couldn't necessarily tell you all the stuff that's out there for industry to do because I was a teacher. I didn't go into industry and then come come back. So I think that it's somewhat of an unrealistic expectation to think that our counselors can automatically make that connection to workforce and to computer science. So that means that we've got to do some investment in either extra people or helping them understand in the area that their school's in or as a country what our high need sectors are. And certainly computer science is that. It's a tough nut to crack because, let's face it, again, I keep going back to accountability. A lot of our counselors are focused on how do I make sure kids get into courses that are going to meet graduation requirements and that are going to help our accountability scores. And the first one I can get. The second one, I think we got to do a better job.
And we
You're
have
welcome.
another question over here. I believe our friends from Code Crew.
That's correct. Good morning, former commissioner. And my name is Meka Eguekwe. I'm the executive director and one of the founders of Code Crew, which is based in Memphis, which is in your region. And I'm actually asking this question because we've been very active in Tennessee around computer science education policy. And I wanted to ask, based on your experience as a former commissioner in Kentucky, our neighbor to the north, what would have been the most effective way to lobby or persuade you as a commissioner of education to increase access to computer science education as the commissioner of education, and such as like every high school offering computer science classes and other important initiatives?
That's a great question. So you wouldn't have had to do a lot for me to convince me of it. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I think helped my colleagues who may not have had that. I think the first advice I would give you is recognize the amount of people who are trying to convince you to do something. Okay, so what's going to distinguish your position over those that everybody else has? I mean, my good friend Kirsten's here. She'll tell you this too. I mean, on a daily basis, I'd get anywhere from 100 to 300 emails a day just to tell me, hey, you need to do X. When I was doing the standards in Georgia, the science standards in Georgia, I had a lady, I don't know what her name was to this day, but I just called her the folic acid lady, because she called me every Friday morning at 10 o'clock to tell me how important folic acid was. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. Folic acid is very important, but what do you want me to do with that? Well, I want it in the standards. I'm like, well, what do you want it in the standards to say? I understand the importance of folic acid. And I mean, I'm saying it partly because it's a little bit funny, but partly because that is also very typical of what a commissioner deals with. You have people that are coming with with something they are very passionate about, and it's possibly very important, but it's disjointed from the bigger picture that I'm trying to create as a commissioner. So in doing this, my first suggestion would be connect it to something that they see as value and give them a path forward. So, one of the things that I give Hadi big props for with code.org was, there was a time when everybody's like, we got to make this a graduation requirement. We got to make it a graduation requirement. Everybody wants to make everything a graduation requirement. In most schools, you got 24 options because there's 6 periods a day, 4 years, right? You can't make everything a graduation requirement. So you have to figure out how to get there. And what Hadi did really well was he started saying, well, look, let's just get it in schools to start with. Because at that time, we didn't even have it in schools. So and then of course, now we're seeing where states are making it a high school graduation requirement. But what I think he did well was gave people a path forward. So when you're doing your work with the commissioner, it's how do you help move this, so this is where I want to be, but this is a path that you could go to get there. Then the last thing I would just share is you got to talk about it in a language they understand. And it's, I mean, for me in Kentucky, you know, especially in Appalachia, you know, the familial bond was so strong in Eastern Kentucky that a kid would not leave Eastern Kentucky because of their family, even if they could have a better life. So one of the reasons why computer science became a big part for us too was that we could see how students could still continue to live with their family unit, but be able to get a degree that would actually be able to make for a better economy. So when you're talking to legislators, policymakers, they understand workforce. They understand what it means to have a workforce, but you've got to sometimes help connect those dots.
We have another question.
Oh.
Hello, my name is Becky Muller, and I'm a Code.org facilitator, CSF and CSD, but I work at a STEM school. And we have adopted the NGSS standards as soon as they came out, but Colorado did it later on. But what I'm asking is, can you kind of go back and tell me, how did you where was your concept of being able to include those engineering standards within NGSS? And is there some way that we could attach some kind of computer science standards in the same way, or through those cross-cutting concepts as you introduce them to students?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I even said back when we were developing NGSS, if you don't do computer science with NGSS, then you're actually not fully preparing students for 21st century. So there's a practice, you know, of computational thinking, and we were a little limited. I mean, I'm just going to be kind of blunt here. You know, the NGSS were developed based on the framework for K-12 science education, which came from the national academies. And the decision was made at that committee that we would stay with the natural sciences. So that's because we got a lot of push to do computer science standards too. And it just wasn't in the scope for us to do the standards for computer science and that. So we tried to give entry points, and I think that there's a couple. I think that, you know, obviously the practice of computational thinking is there, but the engineering standards are most definitely there. But y'all, the instructional part is wide open for computer science. So I was actually sharing this with Kirsten earlier. When I was in Kentucky, we worked with College Board and Code.org to take the AP Computer Science Principles course, and we offered it as a science course that a kid counts toward their graduation. But we trained science teachers to teach it. And in AP CSP, you know, the students do 6 to 8 projects. Well, what we did to justify it being a science was we said, we trained the science teachers to help the students create those projects that prove they know science. Now, they weren't doing a traditional science class. They weren't standing at the board. They weren't necessarily even doing labs in the traditional way. But the stuff that came out of it was incredible. I mean, we had kids that were able to predict glacial movement, that could predict weather, because they were able to actually construct the computer modeling, which, by the way, is another practice. So the instruction was actually wide open, and it fully aligned to NGSS. It fully aligned to CSP, but it was an instructional technique more so than a standards technique. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't know if you recall, Stephen. Yes, I'll make sure we'll get to the question. I don't know if you recall, but we had this one time when I said, why do we have to label things life science, earth science? A student doesn't necessarily, especially at elementary, need to know that they're working in life science. And that, to me, speaks to the integration, right? Because they're actually engaging in the content. If they're using the science and engineering practices, that's what we want students to do across all disciplines, not just within science, but in computer science and in ELA. So I just wanted to bring, and we're going to get back to integration at K-5 level.
Yeah, because I would like to talk a little bit more about that, because it can be an issue.
We'll talk about that. Carlo.
Hi.
Hi, good morning. My name is Dr. Marlo Barnett, and I am from Chicago, Illinois. So I have a question. I wanted to go back to connecting the dots. And so one thing the pandemic has brung out is the digital divide. And so in connecting the dots, how do you get your colleagues to understand that the digital divide has become greater, and how computer science plays into that, especially when we're talking about devices, internet connectivity? So how are you getting your colleagues to understand the bigger picture, and that all of this is a part of affects and impacts computer science as well?
Yeah, you know, I think we've got a great, could y'all all hear the question okay? I should have been asking that question all along. So I think that we've got a prime opportunity because the digital divide has been on people's minds. I mean, I meet with the chiefs in the South, or the commissioners in the South. I meet with, you know, I'm still connected with CCSSO, and I think there is a realization that the digital divide is a real thing. What I'm not convinced of is that we have made the jump from the digital divide because we need to help students who are behind to actually, this is a wave of the future where we're going to have this recognition that the world will never go back to the way it was. Right. And then I would actually go even one more step to say, to recognize the digital divide is to also recognize the limitations placed on a student for their future. The reality is that that working in computer science is going to afford students greater autonomy and greater opportunity in that field.
Exactly.
And that field is going to be at home. They're not going to report to an office.
Exactly.
So, you know, there's a, I think where everybody is we realize there's a digital divide. I mean, look, you can have fiber running underneath your building in downtown Atlanta, but if I can't afford to get to that, exactly, then it's just cable running underneath the building. So I think there's the recognition of that part. I think that people realize that the world is not going to go back, and actually it affords us the opportunity to, and much to the chagrin of children across the nation, snow days may not be a thing in the future.
Exactly.
But I don't know that we've made the next jump to say, we're going to have a remote environment, right, for the most part. So we might need to help connect those dots.
Yeah, that's what needs to get out. Yeah, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I'm a regional partner with Iowa. And my question is, if you have any tips around the different aspects of computer science that are bubbling up now, similar to science where there's life science and earth science and all of that, we have AI and data science and cybersecurity. And I think we're starting to see some confusion, at least in our area, of where the focus should be. And I think most of us know that that's all part of computer science, but how do we have a clear messaging to our states, our regions, and our districts? And how do we deal with that?
So you want me to go ahead?
Go ahead.
All right. This may be a minute. So here's the picture I want to lay out for you. And this goes to the connecting dots, and it goes to your question. SREB, we've done several things over the last several years. In 2016, under the leadership of Governor Hutchinson in Arkansas, we did a commission report on computer science and pathways. In 2019, we released a report called Unprepared and Unaware. Or in 2018. 2019, we followed that up with an economic impact of what will happen. And let me just give you the short story here. This is obviously was pre-pandemic, and what we found was that there are people who are currently in the workforce who, you know, they're owning their homes, they're going on vacations with their family, life is good, they're making money. these folks also have high school diplomas or less, all right? So ages 25 to 35 is who we looked at. And what we found was the impact of artificial intelligence and automation on the workforce over the next 10 years would be significant enough that a large majority of the current workforce in the South would be impacted by automation and AI. So we further looked and said, well, what are the ages of these people's kids? And we found that they actually would be graduating around 2030. Well, those kids are 10 times more likely to go into the same line of work and have the same level of education as their parents. So we followed that up with this economic impact. And what we found was in the South alone. Now, understand how we define the South. SREB is from Delaware. Don't laugh. Delaware,
I've heard
yes, you cannot buy sweet tea in the restaurants in Delaware, but we love them anyway, okay? But from Delaware down to Florida, over to Texas, back up to Arkansas, Kentucky, okay? 18 million unemployable adults by 2030. Now, not unemployed, unemployable, which means they do not have the skill to be involved in an environment or in an economy where food service already in the South is roughly 67% automatable. By 2030, 100% is going to be automatable. You can already go to Wendy's in some parts of the country and order, and a robot prepares the food and it kind of shoots out of a little vending machine kind of deal. So you think about 18 million unemployables. That doesn't count their kids, who, if we haven't done the work that they learn in STEM, won't be able to be a part of that. So advanced manufacturing, welding, carpentry, and building, the things that we have traditionally thought of as kind of blue collar, working with your hands, not anymore. They're actually going to be done using computer science. I walked into Henderson County High School in Kentucky, and when the commissioner comes to visit, what they do is they strap roller skates on the person and they drag them all over the building, And I love that. I always did it after the legislative session because God knows I needed to be out of the Capitol and with kids after the legislative session. And so I walk in and they were like, we got to get you to the welding lab. I'm like, okay. So they took me a few places and they got me there, and I walk in and the kid's like, oh, thank goodness you're here. I got something to show you. I'm like, okay, great. He said, come here and push this button. I said, dude, I'm from the South. You know how many jokes start that way? I'm not pushing this button. And so he says, no, this is going to be safe. I said, okay. So I'll go over and I push the button. And he had made this design to cut my name into this giant piece of metal on a plasma welder. Okay? So I'm standing there talking to this kid. And I'm like, well, tell me a little bit about, because, it didn't happen immediately. He had to cut it. I said, tell me a little bit about this. He said, well, the first thing is, I had to select a metal because I wanted this to be something you can keep a long time. So I'm thinking, okay, science, structure and properties of matter. Awesome. He said, what took probably the longest, though, was to code the machine. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So tell me more about that. And he starts telling me how he's had to learn to write lines of code, how he had to calculate the angles of the R and the circle in the middle of the R and all that. And I'm like, man, I bet your math teacher loves you. He said, oh, I hate math. He said, I'm not very good at it. I'm like, dude. I like the word dude if you hadn't figured it out. I said, dude, you just talked about trigonometry. You actually said sine. S-I-N, not S-I-G-N, okay? He said, yeah, I just did what I had to do to make this piece. Relevance matters. And so if we're going to actually do the things that you're talking about with, we do have to recognize artificial intelligence, automation are going to be a significant part of our workforce. And that COVID accelerated dependence on automation by 5 years. So we're not looking at 2030 anymore. We're looking at 2025. So hopefully that answers your question. I mean, like I said, I'm sorry you had to stand there for that long. But I'm really passionate about this. We are going to be, as a country, in a world of hurt by 2030 if we have not significantly changed how we're approaching K-12 and post-secondary and adult ed to upskill our populace to be able to work in this environment in which computer science is a key part of that economy.
Darcy, you have a question?
Yes, thanks. That's actually a perfect segue to my question, too. So hi, I'm Darcy. I'm from Sacred Heart University, the regional partner in Connecticut. And I want to go back also to the description that you had about the course scheduling, right? That, okay, there's access, but is there really, if this is scheduled at the same time as that? And, I have a lot of compassion for principals who are dealing with the real world and these real choices that students are faced with and that they have to organize around. And so I'm wondering if you have any strategies or thoughts about kind of just broadly breaking through the logjam of this idea of a zero-sum game, right? That more space is less space for someone else, some other area, and thinking about, creating those whole students. At the secondary level, we see that with these course offerings. At the elementary level, that often comes down to this conversation about minutes of instruction time for one thing or another. So I wanted to know if you had any thoughts about kind of working through that. And so, for example, in NGSS, my background is in science education as well. I know that there was so much care and attention done to identifying those standards in literacy and mathematics that related to the next generation science standards. And I wonder if you feel that that attention to the potential for working across areas has been reciprocated by those other content areas, and if you are seeing some progress at breaking through the zero-sum game, and if there are lessons that we can learn for computer science from that.
Great question. Big question, but great question. So I guess let me start with your second question about have other content areas reciprocated. Not as much as I would have hoped. That there's people are scared of the unknown, and teachers by nature want to be the expert in the room. And I get that. I mean, I was in that room. I get it. So to just kind of throw stuff out there and hope that it sticks won't work. Now, I will tell you this. I have seen incredible science education instruction in elementary. And I've seen some really bad instruction in high school, okay? And here's why I think that from the day we started the framework, and then once we started in GSS, everybody was worried about those poor elementary teachers. You remember hearing all that. Oh, they don't know the content. Oh, they don't know this. Oh, I tell you what they do know. They know good instruction, and they know how you can integrate things. Not that they always do, but how they can. And I saw so the rule when I was commissioner was you had to take me to at least one non-tested science class, which freaked out the superintendents because sometimes they were like, I'm not sure if we have any. But I saw incredible stuff in elementary school because as a state, before I became commissioner, they had invested lots of training on how to use math, English, and science together. But then you go to high school, and I'm a former high school teacher, so nobody get offended. I'm talking about my own people here. We just know how to do it. Just ask us. And I mean, I'll never forget this one teacher telling me how if we don't teach the 4 phases of mitosis, they won't be prepared for college. And a college professor sitting 6 feet from her said, I wish I wouldn't even teach that because we usually have to fix it. You know, and so, but there was not an investment in high school like there was in elementary because the assumption was they knew the content. And the reality is, and I think this is true in computer science, it's not about just the content, it's about the thinking that goes into the content and the thinking of how instruction has to be cultivated. The second part of your or the first part of your question, you know, I think that there's a big part of this that industry partners have to play if you're going to find room in the curricula for computer science. Even building career pathways that start in high school that have dual enrollment and all that kind of stuff is not enough if you don't have industry partners at the table that say we need these kinds of people, okay, or these trainings. So Georgia has just, we've been working with them. They've just finished a pathway on nursing. And there's nursing pathways across the country, but the reason I think this one's going to work is Wellstar, who's the biggest healthcare provider in Georgia, has guaranteed every kid that graduates at every level an interview. Well, guess what? They got kids that are taking those courses now. And I think we've got to do a better job of local districts and states finding ways to partner with industry to give a reason for that. Because the biggest problem I see with K-12 is we still look at things as a course code and a course name, and not what the full collection of knowledge needs to be by 12th grade to be successful at the next level.
Thank you. And we have 2 other questions, I think, but I just want to add, we're focusing so much right now on K-12, but what about teacher preparation? If we're not changing how teachers are learning, we're still doing the same thing that we've done years ago and still teaching teachers that teach the same way, we're not going to see change in K-12.
Oh, that's
we don't have
absolutely
time
true.
for that, right? We don't have
That's
time to talk
absolutely true. Absolutely true.
But we'll go to the next question.
Hi, Dr. Pruitt. I am Sherry McGuffin. I'm STEM coordinator from Advanced Kentucky. So thank you for your work in Kentucky. We appreciate it.
Always good to see a Kentuckian.
Absolutely. So my question revolves around advanced placement, AP Computer Science Principles, AP CSA, and what is potentially seen and sometimes seen as a conflict with the dual credit courses. And that's been one of the issues that we've had in Kentucky, getting in computer science into some of those schools where it does not exist, is that it is seen as a competition between dual credit, and sometimes in that mentality, dual credit and computer science don't coexist because teachers aren't seen as qualified enough to teach those. So I would ask what your advice is to alleviate that idea of competition and how we can help it to be seen as something that works with dual credit rather than a competitor.
Yeah, so, I think the first thing you've got to realize is it is a competition. It's unfortunate, but it is. And I don't believe that education made it a competition. I think that parents and communities sort of did. The idea that I can go and take a dual credit course and immediately have credit on my transcript and not have to take a test, I think had a big allure to people. My advice is, we tried to do this when I was in Kentucky, is to try to lower that temperature around the competition. In fact, even allowing the AP courses to count as dual credit. I think that it's a lot of work on the front end of case making, especially to parents and to administrators, because let's face it, to them it's also easier because there's usually a little bit of money involved, especially if it's being taught on campus. There is a lot of I think perception that it's a little bit easier to do a dual credit because you don't have to deal with test security. You don't have to deal with the perception of having to stop, drop, and test kind of deal. So my advice to you would be show people how those two things coexist And not just that they can, but that they probably should. Because there are some things that kids do get a better benefit out of taking dual enrollment because AP doesn't offer it. But there are also things that, especially, I mean, you know, we have one state in the South that has started requiring the AP test at the end of dual enrollment courses, if there's a match, to verify that the dual enrollment course was actually at an appropriate level, because there's people at the policymaking level that are skeptical of dual enrollment too. But I think that making that case, I mean, I had parents when I was in Kentucky that would come up, because I'm a former AP teacher, and I had kids that would go down the road and take chemistry, even for my first year class, not even counting my AP class, because they knew they had a better chance of getting a higher grade in there than they did in my class. Well, they could make a high grade in my class, but they had to work for it. And I'd have parents come up and say, well, why in the world would I do that when they can just go take that class? Why would I want them to take that test? And I think we've got to figure out how, as a school, in your case as a school, to communicate to the community how those things fit together and work together. I don't know where it is now, but you know, one of the things that we worked on when I was in Kentucky was a career pathway in computer science that included AP and dual enrollment. So that there's actually a model there, assuming it's still there, that you can actually show to parents and say, look, there's value here for both of these. And then you got to make that case.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you know, the Cats are playing UT this weekend. I don't know where my Tennessee guy went, but there he is. So
we have another question too, Steve.
Yep.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for all your work. And I just want to say thank you for acknowledging that teachers bring so many strengths to the table and that we need to build off of those strengths and not just consider the deficit model. My name is Leanda Leiser. I'm the executive director at CS for All. And we've been talking a lot about what schools and states can do, but I want to shift the focus a little bit in the other direction. We know that we have a local control country with regionality around state policy for education, but in what ways can the federal government think about empowering, accelerating, supporting the great work that our states do and getting out of their way? We just did a report on AI and data science education with OSTP and the Department of Labor. How did you see in the science education work the federal government could be supportive in the national policies they're allowed to enact, not requirements, but supportive policies to make the work go faster?
So, you're probably not going to like this answer. I did everything I could to keep the federal government out of anything with science. You might remember that when we were doing the science standards, there was this little kerfuffle going on around math and English.
Called Common Core?
I wasn't going to say their name, but yeah. And so, I mean, I would beg the department, do not say the word science. I mean, I literally remember having a nightmare of me watching the presidential debate and seeing the NGSS brought up on a debate stage. I mean, it was, and I guess that was one of the nice things, you know, it was nice to be the second group that walked through the minefield, you know. I mean, at the end of the day, regardless of politics, I don't think states like being told what to do by the federal government. And look, I mean, as commissioner, I was an equal opportunity offender. I had my fights with both administrations, because if I thought they were wrong, I told them. Sometimes more loudly than I needed to. But
we're seeing things like IES money.
Yeah.
Right? There are many people here who have received scale-up grants from the Institute for Education Sciences. You spoke about bringing industry partners to the table. Labor is a very good way. So I'm not talking about like putting a flag in the ground or somehow enacting policies around the politics, but using and leveraging their particular network.
No, I totally get it. What I was telling you is kind of the preamble.
Yeah.
Okay? I think that you've got to, when you're, I mean, the thing is, when you go in and you have CS for All on your business card, and you're trying to get them to, and you're talking to them about industry partners, they've looked at your card and said CS for all.
Yeah.
Okay? So you need to develop very deliberate messages of things that obviously support CS, but don't necessarily make that the primary. Because one good way to kill things in a lot of states is, look, my number one job for NGSS was to make sure nobody said no right away. I mean, they said no later, that's fine. But, I wasn't, but I didn't want them to dismiss it out of hand immediately. So, knowing full well what is in IES grants, what are in, SNAP grants, have opportunity for upskilling adults in computer science. In fact, a lot of people don't even realize if you write your program the right way, while you're upskilling those adults, SNAP grant will pay for meals for the students, for their kids, while they're getting trained. I mean, there's ways to do that. So I think that the lever to pull is being fully aware of what's offered by the federal government in terms of funding, and having a message that's deliberate that allows the federal government to give options for use of that money, but without having the federal government say, you need to go do it for this reason. Does that make sense?
A lot, yes. And I think I love that advice, and I think that's probably super useful for all of our state leaders too. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So it looks like we're bringing the plane in for a landing, and I have one more question to close with.
And you were worried we didn't have enough questions.
Great participation on a Friday, right? All right, so let's talk about gender parity. Currently, women obtain more than half of U.S. undergraduate degrees in biology, 60%, chemistry and mathematics, yet only earn about 20% of computer science undergraduate degrees. The gender parity in biochem and mathematics wasn't the case just a couple of decades ago. What do you think this is? Why do you think this is? And what changed in K-12 to help us usher these changes? And what can we learn from that movement for CS?
So it's a, I think there's there's a couple reasons. There's some that maybe would be more valid in terms of research, and then there's some that I just think. I think that we have seen especially more females in the areas of biology, chemistry, and physics because those have been promoted better. The part that's probably less rooted in research is the people who are usually the decision makers in college are biology, chemistry, and physics people. A lot of your provosts are physicists. You've got a lot of that. But also it's what gets taught in school. So earth science is still not taught in high school. Why would it be? I mean, we only live here. But for the most part, we finished teaching earth science in 8th grade. Well, I think the same parallel could be made with computer science. If there's not an attention to it in K-12, we're not going to be able to feed the pipeline into more people taking those courses and subsequently becoming employed. And I think it's just, we were laughing about this earlier. If you watch The Big Bang Theory, they make fun of the poor earth science guy all the time, and unfortunately it's satirical. There's some truth to that. Now, the people that are doing chemistry, physics, and biology are great people too, don't get me wrong. I've got a really good friend back there somewhere, Gabe, that's a great physicist. But I do think that when we start to shortchange students' experience in K-12, there's no way to think that they're going to get to college and just somehow miraculously find this. So things like Earth and things specifically like computer science, we've got to do a better job of. And I think we've done that with biology, chemistry, and physics. And I think we've worked to lift the stigma of that girls can't do science. But when you define science as only biology, chemistry, and physics, that's where we see the increase.
Well, I think we've come to our time to end the session. So can you please join me in thanking Stephen for being with us today?
Well, I'll say one last thing. You know, if we don't get our act together, then all the opportunity we have will just go up in flames.
Oh, here you go, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll give you a hug.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Pat.
Well, that's exactly what I was hoping that we'd get, folks. I've been following what Stephen Pruitt has been doing for many years now. I remember when actually some of the advocates in this room were reaching out to the science community during the time of the development of the framework and the NGSS. We're wondering, hey, where does computer science fit in, folks? And what we heard back, and you know, Stephen would say this as well, and in fact, he might have already mentioned it, that they were kind of handcuffed by the framework given to them in the development of the standards. And then he did allude to certain things that were included, things like computational thinking, computer modeling, et cetera. What I hope to understand from Stephen was how we can learn lessons from the science movement, even though the science world is still struggling to include science in all elementary schools, but how we can learn from them rather than just repeat maybe the same mistakes. So again, thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Stephen. Let's give them another round of applause. If I can get the slides showing, please. So, I wanted to be open with you guys about something. I taught computer science at the high school level. Actually, I was a high school computer science teacher as well, and then I switched to computer science. Taught computer science for a number of years. Now I've been at code.org for 8.5, 9 years now, so probably been in the computer science game for 15 to 20 years now. And much of the conversation has been around the capacity of the system. Now we have about 33 states with computer science state supervisors, when just 5 years ago it was basically a couple people in Anthony Owen. And now even Arkansas has like 8 to 10 state specialists focused on computer science. But we've been talking about capacity for a long time. We've been talking about just access for a long time, like just getting it on the menu. And Steve talked about that. Just schools, just put it on the menu. Kids will take it, and we're seeing that. We've been talking about participation. How can we just get, representational participation? I'm so eager one day that the discussion around computer science will be about the experience that kids are having. Now, I know that we do talk about that, and there is some research around that experience, but I look forward to the day when the majority of the conversation is around the experience that all of our students are having. That CS for All is not about necessarily just all schools offering it or all students represented, but all students having an amazing time and learning a lot and doing something with it. So I know we're on the edge of that now, folks, and that's why the State of CS report was all about accelerating action. We're there. We are really close. There are states right now that are basically our lighthouse states, our successes. They're still early on, but you know what? We're at a point where we can really say doing this or doing that really does change the game. Right now, I think nationally the percent of women in computer science is at the high school level is something like 30-ish% maybe. I mean, that's still far away from the 50% we're looking for. But there are states where it's like 46%, 48% at the high school level. That's amazing. So this can be done. And I look forward to the time when all of us are gathering together, maybe next year, maybe the next year after that, and much of our conversations around the experience of students. So, how do we get there? Well, like I told you before when I was talking on Wednesday, this conference has been designed around engagement and interaction. And I so appreciate Jackie calling you up to ask questions during the presentation, during the conversation. In the same way, we've set aside time for you all to have strategy sessions from 10:30 to 11:30. Now, if you don't have a date or a plan during that time, after I finish talking, I want you to make a plan. Some of you are from California. Say woo! A lot of you all are from California, right? You're going to have a specific state session just for California following this presentation during this time. If you're not from California, you can go to your regional room and have a conversation around a table or two and just bring people together. Alternatively, maybe there aren't that actually many people from your state here, and maybe you just want to meet with people from another state because you heard about their successes and you just want to replicate them. You want to ask questions. You want to, learn the lessons that they learned and not make the same missteps maybe that they share. So you can meet with another state in that regional room. You can also meet with a speaker or other CSEdCon participant. Remember, you have a link to everyone who agreed to share their contact information. That was emailed to you this Monday. It's towards the bottom of the email in case you missed it. And feel free to reach out to those folks and just ask them, hey, can I, while we're here at the conference, can we just talk about X, Y, or Z? Maybe there was a speaker that you just wanted to talk a little bit more to. And you could also meet with a Code.org regional partner. Code.org regional partners, if you could stand up. So these regional organizations are doing a lot of the legwork, the groundwork in their regions. If you're a district in their region, certainly you can talk to them to find out more about what they're doing in the region to support you. Additionally, you can meet with some of the state CS supervisors. I mentioned them. If they could stand up, we can give them a round of applause. You could also meet up with some of your state computer science supervisors to understand what's happening statewide and be part of the statewide movement. Lastly, feedback. Imagine that Y is next to the E. So go ahead and take out your computing device, your phone or your laptop or your tablet. Do you know why CSEdCon is the way it is this year? We did a number of things different compared to 2019. For example, rather than state networking, we did regional networking. Rather than just one reception, we included a happy hour as well. We do these things based off on feedback. So if you at any moment during this conference thought, you know what? They could have probably done this or that better. Unfortunately, I can't read minds. So please type in this link, bit.ly CSEdCon 2021 survey. It probably takes about 5 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes. Sorry? Gotcha. Jackie will take care of it. Yeah, and hopefully that link is not to the actual, the editable form, it's to the view form. It says view? Okay. Sometimes when you do these forms, they have that default where it's like locked to just the organizational users. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for trying. You'll just refresh when Jackie gives me the thumbs up. Yeah, it's working now? Oh, Jackie, thank you. Yeah, go ahead and refresh. Again, we really appreciate your feedback. We do intend on doing CSEdCon again, and so we want to use your feedback to make it even better for you. Did you like the whole concierge experience where folks emailed you and tried to connect you with other people? Do you want more of that? Do you like the food? Did you not like the food? Do you wish there was this? Do you wish there was that? Do you wish that a certain topic was covered? Go ahead and provide that feedback. Again, we're going to use it. Again, thank you on behalf of the conference team. We're going to be moving to strategy sessions now, starting at 10:30 to 11:30. At 11:30, we'll be back here for just some quick words and lunch. If you do have to leave early at 11:30 and you can't just sit through lunch, we're actually going to have some box lunches that you can just grab and take on the way to the airport. That was based off of feedback as well. So again, thank you on behalf of the conference team. My name is Pat. My email is pat@co.org. You can always personally email me as well. You are dismissed. Thank you.